The Department of Defense under Donald Trump will achieve peace through strength. And in pursuing these America First national security goals will remain patriotically apolitical and stridently constitutional. Unlike the current administration, politics should play no part in military matters. Addressing the recruiting crisis, the retention crisis, and readiness crisis in our ranks.
Members of the security force will remove members.
Would you explain what a jag-off is?
In all of these other circumstances, you've denigrated active duty service members. We have hundreds of women who are currently in the infantry, lethal members of our military serving in the infantry, but you degrade them.
Mr. Hegseth, I do not believe that you are qualified to meet the overwhelming demands of this job.
Things got super spicy during the confirmation hearings for Pete Hegseth, who President-elect Donald Trump has nominated to serve as defense secretary. In fact, from the moment he was tapped for defense secretary, he's been embroiled in controversy. Lots of allegations of bad behavior have been essentially haunting him since the confirmation, well before the confirmation hearing even began. And so we're gonna show you some highlights from the first day of the confirmation hearings. But look, we knew that it was gonna play out this way, considering the fact that there were so many stories coming out, whistleblowers who had spoken out against him when he was in charge of a nonprofit, a military nonprofit, all sorts of stuff. So before we get into all of this, Cenk, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so there's a lot to look out for here. The sexual harassment charges, the alcohol problems, but most importantly, the two things to look out for is he gonna use the US military inside America if Trump orders him to? My overwhelming sense of that, we'll get to it later, but is that he will. And so that's why when he said in the beginning that they're going to be stridently apolitical, really, come on, and follow the Constitution closely. Well, you can't use the military inside America. So already you're going outside the Constitution and outside our laws. So tons of hypocrisy here. But the real question at hand is, will this move any votes? Can they create enough issues for Hegseth that some Republicans vote no? And that is going to be very tough to do. And so let's show you some of the clips here and see if they were able to move the country enough to move a couple of Republican senators.
So just to give you an idea, I mean, obviously we don't have the ability to show you every question and answer portion of the confirmation hearing, but I did watch the bulk of it. And it was very clear to me that the Republican senators were giving him layups, really no difficult questions. They intend to vote in favor of confirming him. Most of the fire came from Democratic senators. And so we're gonna get to some of that in just a minute. But while senators did grill him, others decided to protest him.
You are a misogynist. Not only that, you are a Christian Zionist. And support the war in Gaza by the Zionists.
I want to thank the authorities for their swift reaction.
Meritocracy, warfighting, accountability, and readiness. Addressing the recruiting crisis, the retention crisis, and readiness crisis in our ranks.
Members of the security force will remove members.
Protests make some people very thirsty, as you could see in the video. Every single time he was protested, he grabbed the glass of water and took a sip. But the protests were early on during the confirmation hearing. Things kind of died down when it came to protesters later on, which luckily paved the way for senators to ask substantive questions. Now, Democratic Senator from Rhode Island, Jack Reed, was pretty blunt about his thoughts on Hegseth's qualifications for this role, for the possibility of him being defense secretary. Let's take a look.
The secretary is expected to be a fair, nonpartisan, and responsible leader, as well as a trustworthy advocate for the men and women that he leads. Mr. Hegseth, I do not believe that you are qualified to meet the overwhelming demands of this job. We must acknowledge the concerning public reports against you. A variety of sources, including your own writings, implicate you with disregarding the laws of war, financial mismanagement, racist and sexist remarks about men and women in uniform, alcohol abuse, sexual assault, sexual harassment, and other troubling issues. I have reviewed many of these allegations and find them extremely alarming.
So there you have it. You have a Democratic senator telling him straight to his face, I don't think you're qualified for this, especially considering some of the allegations that have come up against you. If you guys can recall, his own mother had written an email in regard to his abusive nature toward women. She later came out and said that she emailed him immediately afterwards and apologized to him. But that doesn't really matter. I mean, that email was leaked. She said what she said, and it seemed to have come from the heart. And so that's one of the main issues that kept coming up over and over again throughout the entirety of today's confirmation hearing. And so, Cenk, what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I want to go to some of our members that made really good points at tyt.com. Turkosaurus Rex said, no Republicans are going to cross Daddy Trump, get real. And if you watch the hearings, that certainly seems to be the case for now. And it would take something extraordinary in these partisan times for one of the Republicans to cross Trump and vote against Hegseth. So I don't want anybody to think, oh, just because the Democrats are grilling him, that's going to work, right? Erica Like America says, I watched the entire confirmation hearing today. All I could think was, were these Republicans born with no gag reflexes, or is it an acquired skill? And I'm reading these because they're so true, and I love how smart our audience is. Hit the join button below to be a member, or go to tyt.com. And so as you watch it, really, and this happens in both cases. Whenever the Democrats are defending someone, they'll do it. But the Republicans are really over the top, right? And they're fawning of Trump and fawning of any Republican that gets up there. And they're like, so it must be an acquired skill. Or maybe the profession attracts ass kissers like this, and their whole job is to kiss the ass of the donors. So just kissing some other Republican ass probably seems like a low-level lift for them. So look, for example, Hegseth said right in the beginning there, peace through strength, right? Well, that's what the old school Republicans used to say, and then they would start war after war after war and go, well, I mean, we forgot the peace part, but we've got so-called strength as we waste your money and waste the lives of our service members. So he doesn't really sound like he's a new era Republican in any way. He's a very old school militaristic guy. So I don't think we're gonna get any difference there. By the way, I don't know if you heard, but one of the protesters shouted out he's a Christian Zionist. And that's also true, but I would be surprised if any Republican or Democrat asked him about that, because then, the minute you say Zionist in Washington, then he'll get confirmed 100-0 or 99-0. Bernie will vote against him.
So one thing that I will say that I thought was an interesting exchange in the context of this confirmation hearing, it was between Hegseth and Senator Joni Ernst. They focused some of their time on cutting the military budget, which I found a little shocking. I don't know how sincere he is when he says he's in favor of, doing deeper audits of the Pentagon and potentially cutting the defense budget. But he made a point to speak out against the amount of money that we allocate for the military. And so we'll see how that plays out if he gets confirmed. But I will say that it is unheard of, in recent American history to hear that kind of exchange during a confirmation hearing having to do with a potential defense secretary. So what do you think about that, Cenk?
Yeah, I mean, look, I have to confess that I'm super proud that I got this into the national conversation. And nobody was talking about cutting the Pentagon before. Now they're talking about it. Now, does that mean that he's going to go and get confirmed his top priorities are going to be cutting waste out of the Pentagon? He's going to cut 100 billion or 400 billion? No, it doesn't mean that. It's still very unlikely. But at least it has begun as a national conversation in a way that, that Republican senators are asking. They're introducing the question, and they're asking it of a Republican pick for Secretary of Defense, and he's saying, yes, I will cut the Pentagon. And so if they don't, which is still very likely, then we get to hold him accountable for that. And for whatever that's worth. But I think it is worth something in the next election, whether it's the midterms or the general election, where they said they were going to do it and then they didn't do it. And that's very standard politician stuff and not at all populist, etc. Or maybe they do it. And that's obviously less likely, but if they do, that would be spectacular. And I don't care at all who gets credit. And by the way, they could do that and that could be a wonderful thing. And then they could turn around and do other terrible things, and you still give credit where credit is due and discredit where discredit is due.
Yeah, I totally agree with you on that. And to your point about the protester yelling about Pete Hegseth being a Christian Zionist, apparently Senator Cotton also asked him about that during their exchange, and Hegseth absolutely confirmed that he is someone who identifies as a Christian Zionist. Okay, now putting that aside, I want to go to Senator Mark Kelly, since we're talking about the allegations against Hegseth. Mark Kelly wanted to grill him about that, and I thought this exchange was super fascinating, so take a look.
On Memorial Day 2014, at a CVA event in Virginia, you needed to be carried out of the event for being intoxicated.
Senator, anonymous smears.
Just true or false? Very simple. Summer of 2014 in Cleveland, drunk in public with the CVA team.
Anonymous smears.
I'm just asking for true or false questions, true or false answers. An event in North Carolina, drunk in front of 3 young female staff members after you had instituted a no alcohol policy and then reversed it. True or false?
Anonymous smears.
You say you've had personal issues in your past, yet when asked about those very issues, you blame an anonymous smear campaign, even when many of these claims are not anonymous. Which is it? Have you overcome personal issues, or are you the target of a smear campaign? It can't be both.
So he refused to answer yes or no. He kept answering with anonymous smears. It was almost like someone, pleading the fifth, refusing to answer any questions. I thought that was interesting, but there was one question where he said no. And it specifically had to do with the time that he was the head of a military nonprofit. And during that time, he was alleged to have taken those who were working, for him or underneath him to a strip club. He denied that entirely, which I thought was interesting, even though there are several people who have come out and said, not only did they go to that strip club, but he got blackout drunk and behaved inappropriately. So interesting that was the one case where he was willing to say no, absolutely not.
Yeah. And sometimes you can tell from what they say no to that the other stuff is all yes. And then you could debate the one that they said no to, but he was exercised enough about that to say no, whereas the rest he was like anonymous smears. And Mark Kelly's doing a good job there, because that means, he's not saying that they're false. He's just saying, I've been kind of smeared by anonymous sources, although that could still be true. So Guam will capsize dragon. It's another one of our members on TYT.com made a really good point. Why do we even have confirmation hearings anymore? Every justice was asked at their confirmation if they would overturn Roe v. Wade, and they all said no.
Right.
It's pointless. So is Hegseth lying, and will the rest of the confirmation hearings involve people who are lying? Definitely. And by the way, the Biden team lied through their teeth too. Oh, we will represent America and we will be unbiased. And then the minute they got in office, they're like, we will serve Israel first and America 28th. So they all lie. But is Hegseth lying more than the average bear? Yeah, because he has to hide so much more stuff, right? And when be asked directly about it, things that he's written in his book. So, and then there's the 11th hour conversion to allowing women in combat roles, and same thing we saw with Tulsi Gabbard in a story we covered yesterday. And then, but Tom Cotton, it's a good point. I hadn't seen that Tom Cotton asked him that. I love that we clarified that. And then, but it gives you a sense that the reason Tom Cotton, a very friendly Republican senator to Hegseth, because he thinks a lot like Hegseth, he's a neocon war hawk. And so he jumps in to say, you're a Christian Zionist, right? And he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. Because he knows that's going to help him in Congress. It won't help him in the country necessarily, but in the Senate, they're all going to be like, oh, we're so sorry. We're so sorry, AIPAC. Yes, Hegseth, right away, sir. So others have written in, our great members, super smart members we have here, and pointing out, yeah, he's looking forward to doing whatever war Israel is going to bring us into, and so don't be surprised. So obviously, almost everything he's saying is not true.
Yeah, look, at this point, out of all of the various Trump nominees, Hegseth is the one that bothers me the most, because this isn't a small role. This isn't a small position. And for all of the anti-war rhetoric that we heard from Donald Trump, and to be clear, I like the anti-war rhetoric. I hope that, he actually, well, I don't hope, because I already know what he was like in his first term. He was not a dove, okay? He didn't start new wars, but he certainly expanded the drone war that we gave the Obama administration a lot of grief for, and even took it a step further by refusing to report on the number of innocent civilians who were killed as a result of the expansion of that drone war. Obviously, he ripped up the Iran nuclear deal, paving the way for Iran to develop nuclear weapons and potentially inch closer to a hot war with Iran. I mean, he did all sorts of terrible things. But for all that we hear in regard to his anti-war rhetoric, it would have been much better if he had chosen someone, number one, who's a lot more qualified for defense secretary. That's obviously incredibly important. But on top of that, someone who isn't a neocon. Wouldn't it be amazing if we don't have a neocon for once as the head of the Defense Department? But if he gets confirmed, Pete Hegseth is more of the same. And on top of that, he's got all sorts of issues with all sorts of serious allegations against him. And even if you put that aside, you think he hasn't been convicted of anything. We don't know if it's actually true. Okay, fine, put that aside. Is he experienced enough to take on this incredibly important role? And from what I've seen, no, I don't think he is. Just because he served in the military doesn't mean that he's automatically qualified to be the head of the Defense Department.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.